Cool. Thank you. And yeah, thank you for having me. So yeah, my name is Josh. I'm going to talk to you about why I think April Fool's Day kind of sucks and how we tried to change that at Reddit. So before we begin, there are like some things I need to cover to make sure we're all on the same page. April Fool's Day happens every year on April 1st. It's like indeterminate origin, but the idea is people play jokes and pranks on one another. It sucks. I'll get to that. Number two, Reddit is where I did all these projects I'm going to be talking about. If you're not familiar with Reddit, it's this huge website. Millions of people come and get together in communities that are organized by topic. We call them subreddits. And basically, people come to Reddit to discuss their passions, really, in these communities and look at cat pictures. That's pretty popular. And then the last thing is, even though it's just me standing up here, the work that I'm going to show you actually represents a bunch of people's work. Like, I got to work with some very creative and talented people on these things, so I just want to acknowledge that. Even though it's me standing here talking about them, I don't get all the credit for this stuff. Okay, so I'm Josh. My background is in art. I trained as an artist. And I ended up as a product manager at Reddit. And one big question for me was my art background going to be relevant in Silicon Valley? And it turns out it's amazingly relevant. I kind of wish more people who had art backgrounds went into tech. I think a lot of the issues that tech has, people who have experience in art and worked in art are kind of well equipped to deal with some of these issues. And it also turned out that on April Fool's Day was a day when my art credentials really came into play, which is kind of disappointing because April Fool's Day sucks, right? So it is, what is less fun than a day when you're told that you're meant to be having fun? It's just like unspontaneous, like mandated. It's kind of super lame, I feel. And the way it's kind of gone in Silicon Valley, it's kind of taken hold. Like every year, these companies make these really kind of creative and well-produced projects, but they tend to be non-interactive. Firstly, they'll often be like a video or a press release. And they always feel kind of smug to me. They're like companies demonstrating to people how clever they are or how funny and smart. They're very self-serving. And so April Fool's in Silicon Valley has kind of taken on this kind of marketing fellow kids vibe, like it's a very safe way to be, kind of cool. So here are some examples of the ones recently. So this was Google Knows. They've recently come out with Google Now, which was their voice detection. And so this was like smell detection. And they made a really well-produced video, but it was just a video, right? They never made this product. It's a joke. They're kind of parodying themselves. This is a more recent one from Lyft. This is the Lyft Mono. So the idea was you put this mitt on your hand and then you extended your thumb and it would hail you a lift. So I don't actually know if this is a parody or not, or if this is a concept for something they might want to do, but I just felt like these things, both Google and Lyft, are creating these really unique spaces for people to interact, and April Fool's Day is an opportunity to potentially explore that space, and instead these companies are kind of doing what I see as these fairly tame things. So at Reddit we were asking this question, well, what could April Fool's Day be, right? Like Silicon Valley, these tech companies have created these amazingly large platforms in which millions of people can interact at a speed and a scale that they can never do before. And part of what's kind of emerging from that, right, is that these platforms allow the good in people to emerge, but they also allow the bad in people to emerge. And we're seeing this more and more, right? There are some real issues that have come up. So, it took me like 10 seconds to list these down. So we have trolls, harassment, issues with political discourse, filter bubbles, attention economy, fake news, right? There are a bunch of things that need addressing, and I came up with this idea, well, what if April Fool's Day could be an opportunity to explore creative solutions to real problems? If you have this really tough problem, why don't you use this one day a year where you're allowed to kind of take a risk to really try and do something a little different? So this may seem a bit of a stretch, right? Like April Fool's Day, this dumb kind of joke day, and this thing down here feels kind of worthy. And I didn't arrive at this thought immediately. It actually took doing a bunch of April Fool's Day projects or experiments to come to this thought. So I'm going to actually walk you through some of the projects that I worked at Reddit that led me to this idea of April Fool's Day being more useful than I think it currently is. So in 2013, this was the first April Fool's project I worked on at Reddit. It's called Orangered versus Periwinkle. So it was kind of like the conceit was we were mashing up Reddit, the website, with there's a video game called Team Fortress 2. It's made by Valve. It's very, very popular at the time. And the basic concept was we took everyone on Reddit. Reddit is represented by this little alien character. We took everyone on Reddit and we split them up into one of two teams. We either put them on Orangered or Periwinkle. And then we created all these elaborate items and weapons and thing. And as you browse Reddit, like randomly items would drop and you would get hats and stuff like that. And then you can use the items on other people. So Reddit, not famous for being the best looking website in the world. This is how it looked on that day. So as you were using items, so here's someone like there was a item that transformed someone else's text to just say Tom Cruise and stuff like that. It was like pretty chaotic in actual fact. No one knew what was going on. We broke the site. People came to the site like, I just want to see cat pictures. What is this? And actually the site went down multiple times because of the strain we were putting on it. This is someone who got a bunch of hats. That's how that looked. That was pretty wild. And so overall people in the community who participated had a really good time. Like they enjoyed just like this kind of fake fight that they had between one another. And so at the end of it, we were kind of like, we only ran it for about 6 hours, and at the end of it, we were like, wow, let's never do that again. But what were the key lessons that we learned? And the way I looked at this, and it's taken a long time for me to arrive at these lessons. The first one is don't affect your core product. This one seems like a no-brainer, but there are people that use Reddit as a tool, and they want to come and they want to have their experience. We shouldn't subject them to our like zany idea. The other one is keep things simple. So this was an observation by Max Goodman, who's here back there, who worked on this project with me. And he said at the end of it, we didn't need to create all those items and hats and all this elaborate interaction. We could have just put people on two teams, orange and red, or orange and blue, and let them figure it out. And they would have created all this like mythos and really imaginative ways that they could interact. And that kind of feeds into this last one, that we've kind of realized that our users were way more creative than us. So this actually goes against, how April Fool's Day projects were thought of up until now, I think, or how we have been thinking of them. Like the idea that you would create something, the company would sit down, be very clever, come up with something and present it to the users, and the user would be like, oh, that's very clever. What we actually realized was, hey, the users are the ones, there are millions of them, like just by simple numbers, they're going to be able to be way more creative than us, and we should embrace that with these projects. So that led into, in 2015, we launched this project called The Button. So the button was pretty simple in concept, factoring into that keep it simple idea. So there's a timer and a button. The timer will count down from 60 seconds. If the button is pressed, the timer will reset to 60 seconds and continue counting down. And this was the crucial fact, you may only press the button once. So this is what it looked like. You would go to a subreddit that we had dedicated to this. There was a button and a timer. Once you pressed it, the timer did reset, and then you couldn't press the button again. Another thing that we did was based on when you pressed the button, we gave you a little colored blob next to your name. We call this flare. And so, for instance, if you pressed the button when there were 50 seconds left, you would get purple flare. Whereas if you pressed the button where there was only 1 second left on the timer, you got red flare. And so what kind of emerged with the button was like some immediate tension around the fact it was, you could only press the button once, right? So when you were going to press it kind of became important. There was also this moment of, hey, if you press the button and you're the first person to get blue flare, in the community, you're going to be a celebrity. But you're only going to be a celebrity for up as long until someone gets green flare, and then you're just like another random person who was compulsive and had to press the button. And then what we also saw emerging was kind of like the Orange, Red, and Periwinkle. There was like this tribalism, right? Like people, if they pressed and they got green, green was great, everybody else sucked. And the community absolutely loved this. They went crazy with it. They created a bunch of stuff. So this was a pretty cool video. This was about the experience of pressing the button. So he's gray, he decides to press, he gets purple, which was commonly thought of to be the worst color, and he's just distraught. So yeah, people did a ton of illustrations, like building up these identities around the different cohorts. People made a movie poster. This was an illustration of the first person ever to get red flare, which they got accidentally through a glitch. It was kind of a big deal. People created all these tools and plugins. So this was a Chrome extension that you could use to monitor when the button was counting down, and you'd be like, oh, I want to get orange flare. The Chrome extension would notify you and say, hey, you should go and press the button. So the button was like a huge success. Over 1 million people chose to press the button. What that led to was the timer kept running for over 2 months, right? So over 2 months, every 60 seconds, some human decided to press the button, which like blew my mind completely. And the lessons that we got from that, users are more creative than us. This ties into the Orangered versus Periwinkle thing again. We decided to keep it simple by giving users a framework and let them be the creative ones. And all this mythos and all these ideas that they created around it, they really flourished. The other one that really stuck with me and has been the thing that led to the future work that we did was this idea that uniting people through difference is easy. So in the same way with Orangered versus Periwinkle and the button, essentially what we did is we just put people on separate teams. And it turns out people are really, really good at creating stuff, even if they're like messing around when they say, I'm part of this group, I'm not part of that group. And I felt that Reddit had kind of demonstrated that it could do that we could make these fun, creative projects if we did that. And I instead wanted to ask the question, well, could we build an experience that actually encouraged people to collaborate with one another rather than like pretend fight? So this leads back to this initial premise, right? Like, what is a real problem that we're having? And on Reddit, the way I see it, as well as for a lot of online platforms, I see one of the issues that we face is around collaboration, right? Like a small group of toxic people can disrupt the experience for the many, basically. And so I wanted to know, could we use April Fool's Day to try and build an experience that resisted that kind of abuse from a few individuals? And this wasn't the first project by any means that's explored this idea of like mass collaboration online. And there have been a ton. So this was Twitch Plays Pokemon, which launched in 2014. It was a group of, it's over 100,000 people playing the Game Boy game Pokemon Red on Twitch by issuing chat commands. You would say up, and then the character would go up. But the problem was thousands of other people were issuing commands at the same time. So it's just like total chaos led to the character spinning in the circle in the middle. But after 2 weeks, they managed to complete the game, which was kind of a great triumph. Other examples of getting groups to collaborate have been slightly different. So this was one from last year that you probably heard of, Bodie McBoatface. So this was an online poll to name an Arctic research vessel. And this probably wasn't the name that the poll creators had in mind when they set up the poll, right? But it's kind of like, this is kind of like the anarchic, kind of chaotic, but kind of benign. This is what you can get when you ask the internet to collaborate, which is kind of fun but harmless. In other cases, things can be actually quite dangerous. So this was Tay. Tay was a Twitter bot from Microsoft, and the way Tay worked is you would tweet at Tay, and then she would take what you said and use it in her future replies. So the idea that she would become more human as time went on. And as you can imagine, this led to some like pretty horrendous stuff almost immediately. And so this is like one of the mildest tweets I could find from Tay. And this was kind of tragic. I thought Tay ended up having to be shut down because they just couldn't control what people were trying to do with it. And so the question really came up for me, well, why do some of these projects that ask people to collaborate online succeed, and why do some of them fail? And after talking with a bunch of people about this, I kind of came up with this idea that our interactions are defined by the platforms we build. This is kind of like a roundabout way of saying that when we create a space for people to interact online, the decisions that we make when we create that space will determine the interactions that they can have. And so going into the next April Fool's Day project, the question I was really trying to ask was, well, can we build a platform that encourages collaboration and resists abuse? Specifically in the case of, can we prevent single bad actors disrupting the experience for the many? And that was how we came up with the idea for the project that we did last year on April Fool's Day called Place. And place was pretty straightforward. There's a blank canvas. It was 1 million pixels wide by 1 million pixels high. And you could place a pixel anywhere on the canvas. But once you did that, a timer started counting down from 5 minutes, and you weren't able to place another pixel until that time had elapsed. So what became apparent there is that you couldn't draw anything on this canvas by yourself, right? It was going to take you a really, really long time to do anything. But if you've got a bunch of other people, you could really quickly achieve your goals. So place essentially de-emphasized the individual in favor of the group. I think most of our interaction online, we're used to the individual being the most important part, right? Like we interact, we get an immediate response. But in place, we kind of slowed that down and instead suggested, hey, if you want to achieve something, you need to find a group of people to collaborate with. And we summed this up with this idea. Individually, you can create something. Together, you can create something more. Hold on. Okay, so Reddit just gave millions of people the opportunity to anonymously draw whatever they wanted on a blank canvas. What could go wrong? So this is about 2 hours in. This rather phallic image started to emerge on the canvas, and this was like super disappointing, right? Like this, I felt this is going the direction of Tay. This is the abuse case emerging, and we thought we were going to have to shut it down. But then we went back to this idea that if we truly believe that the interactions that people have in this experience are determined by us, by what we created, well, we're in control of that scenario. And one thing we realized that we were doing is we were starting everyone off in the same spot, right in the center of the canvas, which was where this image emerged. And so we made a really simple change. We just randomized the starting position of everyone on the canvas, and instantly that image disappeared. Our thinking was that people arrived, they didn't fully grasp what they could do with the canvas, so they just contributed to the first thing that they saw. Whereas when we randomized their starting position and they started in parts of the canvas that didn't have anything, they really thought about what they wanted to do with the space. And so instantly we saw some really amazing forms of collaboration start to emerge. So this was one of the first things that I really liked that emerged. It's called the blue corner. It appeared in the bottom right-hand corner of the canvas. It was pretty simple how you participated in the blue corner. You just painted blue where there wasn't blue in the bottom right-hand corner. This was really amazing. It was like they came up with a form of collaboration that described itself. It was very easy here to know how to participate. Then over time, some more complicated forms of collaboration emerged. So this is the video game character Mega Man being drawn. I think the fact that it's based on a sprite, like an 8 or 16-bit sprite, makes it easy for people to, there was a map for people to go off. And then over time, people started drawing like way more creative things on the canvas than we thought possible. So what you're seeing right now is thousands of people working together to draw the Mona Lisa on a canvas, each person placing a single pixel every 5 minutes or so. And this like totally blew our minds. Like this was place achieving, going beyond what we thought it could achieve. So what I'm going to show you now is a time lapse of the entire canvas. I've been showing you chunks zoomed in. Place lasted for 3 days. I'm going to speed that up into about 10 seconds just so you can get a sense for what went on. So you can see the blue corner down there on the right. Country flags, really popular, but easy for people to organize around country. There are like memes, video games. It kind of feels like the internet or Reddit kind of threw up on itself, but in a delightful way, I think. It reminds me a lot of, there was a project in the early 2000s called the $1 Million Homepage, which some of you may be familiar with. And I feel this has a very familiar or very similar aesthetic, which I really, really like. And because there's so much that happened on the canvas, it's hard for me to talk about all these things in great detail, so I'm just going to talk you through one story that was very personal for me. So one morning, I'm browsing the canvas, and I see this image in the top right. So a bunch of groups have figured out, if you put your subreddit name, so r/goodboy is the name of a community on Reddit. If you put your name on your artwork, people who wanted to participate could figure out where to go to find out how to join in. So I wanted to join in. I love Good Boy. It's a great meme. I go there and I see, wow, they're using a Google spreadsheet to figure out where each person should place the next tile, which is amazing. That's great. And then down below, they're having a discussion. And this part really stood out to me. Someone says, why is one of his clogs bigger than the other clogs? And the other person says, the Dutch drew it like that. I don't know. And I'm thinking, like, what are they talking about, clogs? And I go back and I look, and sure enough, the dog on the left is wearing clogs. And then I'm like, what's going on? And then I zoom out, and I realize it's because the good boy group is sharing a border with the Dutch group. And these two unrelated groups, right, like the Holland contingent and the good boy contingent, have somehow arrived at this like diplomatic solution to sharing a border, which is putting clogs on a small dog, which just totally blew my mind. I loved it. So over 72 hours, more than a million people placed pixels on place. But actually, I think the most amazing thing was what didn't appear on the canvas. It was really hard for people to abuse place because of the emphasis we placed on the group rather than the single individual. It was way easier for people to group together to do a good thing rather than it was for people to group together to do a negative thing. And one thing I want to be realistic about is place going really well doesn't actually change the way Reddit works, right? We're not going to suddenly Reddit just becomes a website about a canvas. But that was never the goal, I think. What place has done is provided some insight for the future when we're making decisions about how people interact with one another. The success of place will make us think about how we can construct those interactions, preferably that emphasize the group more than the individual. So if any of you happen to work for tech companies, and as April Fool's Day approaches this year, I would encourage you to think about what is a real problem your company is facing, and is there a creative solution that you could use April Fool's Day as an opportunity to explore? Cool, thank you. Cool, yeah.